Hello, everybody. It's Philip Lee returning with another episode of Civil War Chat. Today is the 13th of August, Friday, 2021. And today's topic is critical race theory and Confederate symbols. Click on the subscriber button below to be subscribed to my YouTube channel, and then also on the notification bell in the upper right to be notified when new episodes are released. Now, let's get started with critical race theory and Confederate symbols. Critical race theory is a race-specific derivative of critical theory. The latter originated with the neo-Marxist Frankfurt School of Sociology in 1923 Germany. Its purpose was to learn why communism was not spreading from 1917 Russia to more industrialized countries, as Marxist theory had predicted. The Frankfurt scholars concluded that the problem was Western culture. To provoke a communist-style revolution in a Western industrialized country, they realized that they must first undermine the culture from within. Even though a society will always be composed, in their theory, of two classes, victims and oppressors, Western culture prevented too many of the workers from perceiving their victim status relative to the capitalists, as Marxists had been looking to them to recognize. The Frankfurt group, as they dismantled the culture, even though Adolf Hitler demonstrated the power of race as a fracture line, the Frankfurt scholars overlooked it, even as they fled to Columbia University to escape Nazism. They arrived in Columbia University during World War II, when people like Eric Foner's uncle, Philip Foner, was there. Eric Foner then attended the school, and he's the fellow that wrote the book on Reconstruction that basically characterizes all whites of the Southerners as being preoccupied with nothing more than abusing blacks. Anyway, once they got to Columbia, they met people like Foner, and then their successors in the United States would discover race and gender as useful fault lines in the 1960s and 70s. So instead of just workers versus capitalists, in the 1960s and 70s, the Frankfurt School people that remained in the United States and their disciples discovered that they could divide the culture along race and gender lines and thereby destroy the culture. Now, critical race theory originated as critical legal theory in the 1970s, when some law professors wrote papers claiming that America's legal system was written by white men for the benefit of white men. Therefore, they concluded that the legal apparatus was systemically biased. Consequently, equality under the law, they argued, was just a camouflage for white supremacy, patriarchy, and racial oppression. The presumed systemic racism would need to be offset by concrete anti-racist measures, they argued. Now, a 1993 Harvard Law Review article by Professor Cheryl Harris equated whiteness with property ownership. Her anti-racist recommendation was to suspend private property rights so that land and wealth may be seized from the rich and be redistributed along racial lines. Thereafter, anti-racist demands escalated. In 2014, Ta-Nehisi Coates recommended or he made his case for slavery reparations in an Atlantic magazine article. Last year, a Duke University economist estimated that the appropriate compensation should be $12 trillion. Ibram Kendi of American University wants a new federal Department of Anti-Racism sanctioned to nullify, veto, or abolish any applicable law. The new department would be unaccountable to voters of any branch of the federal government. In short, on racial matters, it would be dictatorial and therefore more powerful than any other branch of the government. Professor Brandon Hasbrook at Washington and Lee University argues that blacks should be given 2 votes for each vote that a white gets. Critical race theory has moved into the private and government institutions under euphemistically termed diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Such programs teach students and employees that whites and males are not only privileged, but also endemically racist and misogynistic, respectively. The most important thing about you is not your behavior or character. It is your race and gender. If you are a white male, you are an oppressor of blacks and women, whether you realize it or not. If you admit it, you are shamed. If you deny it, your very denial is presumed to disclose your guilt, and there's no arguing with that. The purpose is to coerce false confessions. The purpose of their instruction is to coerce false confessions, because as such confessions are repeated over time, the confessors themselves come to believe them as valid, even though they know they weren't when they first started. There is no escape from this grand fraud. It is a catch-22, perpetual. Although the military has traditionally been a bastion of conservatism, that is no longer true. According to Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Matt Lohmeyer, who just recently wrote a book on how the critical race theory is getting into the military, and diversity, equity, inclusion is getting in. Well, anyway, he writes, the House version of the 2021 National Appropriations Act would establish high-level chief diversity officers, plural, empowered to approve promotions for officer candidates, only those who embrace critical race theory. It would also establish a diversity and inclusion council at the Defense Department, empowered to swiftly remove all so-called, quote, racist symbols and monuments, close quote. 2 months ago, in June of 2021, 6 of the very top West Point graduates wrote and signed an anti-racist manifesto. All complained that the Point did not do enough to root out their white supremacy, a characteristic that the authors claim is the norm among white Americans. Their manifesto also urges the Point to remove all names, monuments, and art honoring Confederate figures. It calls upon the administration to specifically block donations from the United Daughters of the Confederacy if the money is to be used for promoting white supremacy ideals, as the Daughters had done in the past, according to the manifesto. The destruction and removal of Confederate symbols, especially during the past 2 years, symbolizes the destruction of our culture from within, just as the Frankfurt School Marxists hoped it would. They realized that culture is the glue that unifies a country. It is the tradition that was created out of the chaos of our revolution. If the structure of the culture is ruptured, chaos unwittingly returns. Eventually, traditionalists will do anything to defend themselves against the return, because chaos reflects a society in ruin, the destruction of the society. Time and again, the result of this sort of thing have been countries like Cuba and the Soviet Union. Elite politicians, media personalities, and educators falsely argue that opposition to critical race theory is opposition to teaching students about America's historical flaws. We all were taught about slavery. We all were taught about the civil rights movement. but there's a difference. There's a difference between teaching about critical race theory and teaching critical race theory. The former informs about a theory, whereas the latter uncritically promotes a doctrine for the purpose of imposing it upon our society. There can be no hope of preserving Confederate memory, or even the respect of men like Robert E. Lee, if critical race theory continues to gain traction. There's really no hope for our country if it continues in the direction it's going with this critical race theory. So let me share something here. If you want to learn about Reconstruction, I recommend my book, U.S. Grant's Failed Presidency. There have been so many hagiographies, rose-colored biographies about Grant in the last 30 years, that people have really lost touch with how he failed at his presidency, and much of what he did caused the lingering problems with Reconstruction. He is falsely praised as a hero of civil rights, but the only race that he cared about protecting was the blacks, and only then because he wanted their votes. That's documented in my book. So if you want to get the book, it's Amazon, Barnes & Noble, any fine bookstore for $22. If you want an autographed copy, you can get it from me by contacting me, and I'll sell it to you for $25. If you're here in the United States, I'll cover postage. But to get in touch with me, you've got to email me, Phil, P-H-I-L _Leigh, L-E-I-G-H at me.com. Okay, thanks for watching, and we'll be back soon.